Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to review this sword right here. It is a Kingston Arms Type 14 13th century arming sword designed by Angus Trim, and there's a lot to unpack in that title. Before I do, though, a couple disclaimers. One, this is my property, and I bought it secondhand, so I own it. It's mine. It's not a review sample this time, which is what has been featured a lot on this channel lately. The review is also hot off the heels of the Depika review that I did some time ago. Somebody asked me to compare this sword and that sword, or it was among the choices that they were considering in a Type 14. And since I still have the Depika fresh in my mind, I only did it a few days ago. I thought I would take the time to do this review now. Well, I could still compare and contrast the two, even though I really can't because the Depika is now gone. But I did take measurements, and I still remember it. So anyway, that's what prompted this review. Again, it's my property. I don't study historic European martial arts. And another bit to note about this being secondhand is, well, I do think it's reasonably representative in terms of the aesthetic, perhaps, of the sword. It's not representative in terms of the sharpness. The previous owner did sharpen it. I don't know that they did the greatest job, and I may have mucked it up even further, but I don't think the cutting that you'll see on like water bottles and stuff is really representative of what the Kingston Arms brand could do. This sword could certainly cut better if I took the time to put a proper edge on it, which I didn't, because this video is, well, it would cut better. That's it. It would cut just fine if I put a proper edge on it. As it is, it's pretty dull. So anyway, that said, I can do some visual tours, and then I can talk a little bit about the resilience. I did abuse it, debatably, towards the end of the video, but I wasn't intending on breaking it. I was just intending on pushing it in a similar way that I did the Depika sword. So we'll talk about that experience. The sword is $390 on Cult of Athena right now. That's ballpark what you could expect to pay for one, and so bear in mind that that's the price point that I'm going to consider it at. But basically, I'm going to start the review now and stop blabbing about the context stuff. So, pommel right here. One thing that you'll spot is it's a simple wheel pommel. The edges are all nice and smoothed out in such a way that they appear mostly crisp, but at the same time don't have any bite in your hand apart from the general shape. Now, I don't study historic European martial arts. Using a wheel pommel is not my favorite thing to do. No matter what I do, they seem to rub into my hand with very rare exception. And this is one of those where if I throw the sword out there, it certainly rocks itself into the meat of my hand in a way that I don't particularly find pleasing, but that's more or less my experience with wheel pommels, regardless of what they are. Anyway, I like that the edges are smooth, so that's pleasant. The peen on here is also relatively smooth, so it's got some hammer marks that appear misplaced, but at the same time they're there, and overall it's a reasonably fine appearance, very practical and simple in nature. There's not a lot of taper in the fittings or anything here, which seems like a missed opportunity. I know Angus Trim is the designer here. Incorporating some level of taper in the fittings when they're cast seems like not a terrible chore, and it adds a little bit of extra dimension, even something small. Anyway, pommel overall relatively simple, and it has this finish on it that I really like to see. It's like this stone washed, or like they put all the fittings in a tub and rolled them together. It has this kind of galvanized look to it, which is a little bit different, not something that I see on every brand, something a little bit unique to Kingston Arms. It gives the metal a little bit of texture, and I happen to like the way it flows through all of the fittings. It's present all the way down to the chape here. They all have a similar metal finish, which is unique, and I happen to like the look. It's different, again, something that I haven't seen outside of the entry-level Kingston Arms pieces. The way it butts up to the grip here, I can see that it flattens out, but I don't notice any of the characteristic flat bits here that tend to be left over and add some hand chafage opportunity. So here, the gap and transition seems pretty well handled. It overlaps the cord area a little bit. I don't mind that, though. It covers up kind of the flat spaces and some potential ledge that could be hazardous to my hand. So overall, I happen to like how it transitions here. That brings us to the grip. In this case, it's supposed to be cord wrap, wood core, then cord wrapped, then wound in leather and such. I don't know if that's the case here. I haven't pulled it apart, and I don't intend to. But what I can say is that the cord wrap is very tactile in your hand. It has a lot of texture to it in this one. I happen to really like that, though. It makes me feel like I have a solid purchase. The grip is small and round. There's not risers on it, and generally speaking, not always, but in some cases, I like to hold the sword tight in my hand like this and try to pull one of the quillions and twist it. And if I can twist it, then generally what that means is as I do hard strikes and impact, the indexing is going to be off, and I'll have to adjust my grip a little bit. This one it has the shape that isn't doing it, I think, a huge amount of favors. It's pleasant to hold, but at the same time, not as secure. These ribs on here, this texture that's on the grip is really helps me in feeling like I'm securely gripping the sword. And I only tested it with a bare hand. I didn't do gloves at all, so your mileage may vary depending on what you put on your digits. There is a prominent feeling from the seam here. Now it's reasonably well done. It doesn't stand out a lot. It's not stitched like it is on some of the other swords, but I can definitely feel it, and I feel like if I pried at it, it could come undone. Well, not undone, but I'd be able to pull like the ledge up or something like that. That said, if you are wondering which edge you're using, you can certainly feel it in your bare hand, which edge you're using and which one has the seam. So it's a reminder, sometimes people have one very sharp edge and one slightly blunted. If that's something that you do, then the feeling of the seam will allow you to do that without having to stick your fingers on the sword. Apart from that, the shape, as you can see, it gently tapers down, swells in the center. I like the way it transitions to the grip here. It doesn't overlap. The hilt center riser area here does overlap just a little bit, but not in a way that is a discomfort, makes me uncomfortable at all. Nothing to really catch. I can get a fingernail on it if I want to, but nothing that bites into my hands or is uncomfortable. And all the edges on here seem reasonably well smoothed out, which is appreciated. Nothing in the experience of whacking this into a log, which I will do later in this video, was uncomfortable, apart from my putting my thumb in the wrong spot and the crossguard disagreeing with that decision. Anyway, grip wise, I like the shape. It's simple. I wouldn't mind a riser or something here, but the tactile sensation that I feel from the texture is really all that I need. Some people like these really simple grips, and I really do like that it has some dimension here. My only concern is, well, it's easy to index. I don't know how well it would work if I was wearing a glove, how secure it would necessarily feel. But indexing wise, given that it's ovoid, it rests well in the swell of my hand, and I feel like it's pretty easy to index. That kind of moves us up to the crossguard area, which instantly is a little bit part of the grip. This center riser, I found myself, I don't know what you would call it in historic European martial arts, but in the Eskrima class that I took, they called it a redondo. So you would strike the sword out this way, or anyway, I'm not going to do it here and whack my microphone, but I found that this little center riser gave my thumb like a place to rest and comfortably apply pressure to the grip in such a way that it aided with control. So I happen to like this little center ridge here for more than aesthetics. It has a meaningful application in where I put my thumb and how I move the blade if I choose to do that. I wouldn't recommend putting a finger over in this one. It was sharp. I don't know if that was a later sharpening or not, but it's not comfortable to really finger the guard, if you will. Apart from the grip side of things, I happen to really like the execution on this particular guard. I was less a fan of the previous Kingston Arms that I reviewed with the S-shaped guard. This one is small and I think very classy looking and well executed. I like the overall shape. I think it's handsome. It has some dimension with the center ridge and swell. They taper down into these kind of pentagonal shapes, if you will, and overall, I don't know, I think they're reasonably handsome. It is worth noting, crossguard wise, when I started doing some abusive testing, this crossguard was completely secure and had no rattle in it. It still doesn't. You know, if I smack it, it doesn't rattle, but I did hit it against a log. I did abuse it a little bit, and if I pull on it, I can feel a little bit of movement. You might be able to hear it in the microphone here. But I really have to apply a lot of pressure to get that to happen, and it didn't start until after I repeatedly beat against a log. And it's not particularly sharp, so lots of shock went into the sword. It's not a surprise. That's something that certainly can happen. I was hoping it wouldn't, but it certainly can. It did here, and overall it's really minor. Again, I have to apply quite a bit of pressure. It's not as though it rattles substantially by just giving it a thwack on the pommel. Before I move to the blade, I'll talk briefly about the scabbard, which is maybe a good starting point for somebody to work on a scabbard. This is how it came to me. I don't know if there was any other belt system that was involved. This little leather mouth area here, I like how it butts into the crossguard. It's got a nice little cutout. I think it overall is okay. It's a simple leather, but the leather seems to be of reasonable quality. Sometimes on scabbards, even in the $400 Star Wars price point, I can push on them and the leather moves around. That doesn't happen here. It shows pings and dings reasonably easily, and on the back side, It's not stitched at all, it's just glued down. So if you got this wet, if you're using it as a costume or something like that, I would have some concern about it loosening over time and coming undone because it's just glued down rather than stitched. So not great in that respect. Relatively simple looking, but maybe you could wet the leather and adorn it in some way. It might be a good base to start with. I do like the execution on the chape on here, and it's worth pointing this out in particular because on swords that are significantly more expensive, I find that the chape catches more, and that's a little nuance that maybe I care about because I tend to whack things with these when I walk around with them because I don't do it very frequently. But this doesn't have any sharp ledges on it, nothing. There's no point that I can catch my skin on it, so I'm thinking if I decided to walk around the Ren Fair with it and there was a tablecloth that I happened to pass by, it wouldn't take down all of the fancy bits and bobs on that tablecloth because my chape got snagged on it. It's got little rivets on the side. It's rounded, you know, it's not as aggressive as some, but I like the execution. I like how well pressed it is to it, and while it lacks in some handsomeness perhaps, in terms of execution, I happen to really like it. It protects it while it bounces on the ground and also doesn't catch on things. So I do really like this point. It's also worth noting, scabbard wise, a change I mentioned in the beginning of this video, that this is hot off the heels of the Depika sword review, and I did try placing this in the scabbard for the Depika, and it does fit. So I can put this sword in the scabbard for the Depika, which I happen to like quite a bit more. The chape on this is better, but I like the leather. I like the look of the Depika scabbard a little bit more, and so the belt and all of that seem like a reasonably nice scabbard, and this one does fit in it. You'd have to watch the review to see my complaints about that particular scabbard. It's not perfect, but at the same time, this one rattles and freely falls out. The Depika is the reverse. It's very, very tight, and you almost have to fight to get it out. But I think with a little bit of kajiggering, I might be able to fit this sword and have this cross-section cut out in the Depika scabbard. I haven't tried it, but I do know that the sword in general seems to fit. But the crossguard on here is a limiting factor because it isn't made to fit the same way. Anyway, scabbard is okay, but a little bit of letdown. Really like the chape, but loose fit, simple leather. For a $400 sword, it's not bad, but at the same time, it doesn't wow you. I'll talk about the blade here, and I also do want to note that length and dimensions and specifications and dynamics are all listed in the description down below, so take a look there. I did my best to put in the weapon dynamics computer and stuff, so my subjective and novice opinions about how it feels hopefully can be supplemented with that information, which, if you know how to read it, will tell you more than I can. Regardless, so disregard the sharpening lines on here because that was done post-purchase by the previous owner of the sword. The fullet runs quite a bit longer than at least the Depika one that I'm comparing it to in my mind. It's about twice as long. The Depika one ran 1/3. This one runs about 2/3. They do terminate in roughly the same spot, which is nice. At least they're not off substantially to the eye. And in comparison to the other sword, it maintains quite a bit thicker profile. I don't know how accurate to a Type 14 this is or isn't, honestly, but distal taper is present. It has a gradual taper that runs down the blade. If I bend it, it seems to bend in roughly the top third of the blade. I do want to note that I don't know, again, if this was the previous owner, but in some lights, it appears like the blade has a slight cant, but not this way. So I think there is a slight warp in the blade in this area, and I don't know, again, if that was from previous user who did say they used this, but it was present before I whacked it into a log. So also worth noting, it does seem to run straight, but it seems to maybe cant just a little bit, and this is the way I received it, and I don't think the previous owner kind of made it divert a little. It's not a lot. You have to be kind of particular to spot it, but there's ever so slightly a twist in this area of the blade. Anyway, it has a slight Kingston Arms etching on here to note that it's made by Kingston Arms. It's got their symbol on it, their maker's mark. It has a relatively simple satin polish to it that is kind of nice. There's tool markings and stuff that I can make out in the full ring and some spots on the blade. I don't think that those were from the previous owner, and I feel like I could take the ultra fine Scotch Brite pads that you might use on an Albion and smudge this around and have it blend and clean up reasonably well. As it is, I haven't done any of that. I thought I might sharpen it and give it another try. Cutting scratches, I did try doing some cutting, and one of the things that I cut was a metal shaving cream can. I will say that the steel held up well, though it did get scratched relatively easy, so hopefully those those clean up with the Scotch-Brite pad the way I think. But as I talk about cutting, actually, it's a good time to move into cutting. I tried cutting a water bottle. It's not sharp enough to do it. I just batted the thing around. There's a lot of shock that went into the sword, though, and it seemed to hold up fine. Nothing bent or unbent. After the water bottle, I did cut a shaving cream can just for fun and kind of see what it would do. It left some small scratches, but I don't see any edge damage. And it is a steel can. It's not an aluminum can. And there's apart from some surface scratches, I don't see any issue with the edge, and it popped the can apart. Certainly better than it did the water bottle. Though the can might have popped itself apart a little bit too. The next thing that I did was just what ended up causing failure on the Topeka piece. I took it to the same log and just finished off the bit of branch that I was chopping. This is pretty dull, and in doing that I did get a little bit of rattle in the guard, but the blade didn't break. So that's kind of what I was doing, a brief comparison. It is worth noting though that I'm kind of pulling my punches a little bit here. I didn't swing this for the fences. I didn't probably swing it maybe as hard as I did on the Topeka one. At least that's my impression. I don't think I swung as hard. I swung with some force, enough to develop a slight rattle, but not really as hard as I think I was on the Topeka side. So take that for what it's worth. It's dull. I am still swinging hard, but maybe not as hard, and probably not as many times. At the same time, no bending, no issues. I did take the point, jam it into the log, twist it just to see if anything would bend. I give it a brief slap on the side of my stand as well, and nothing bent or unbent, frankly. So the steel seems to be of a reasonable quality. It's not impervious though. Obviously banging it on a log caused some rattle to appear. If I persisted with that kind of abusive activity, no doubt that this would become more rattly, and it seems like I could push it to failure if I wanted to. It's just not something I want to do. I tend to do that with samples that are sent to me, at least at times, but when I spent my own hard-earned money on it, then I don't intentionally try to break them, though sometimes it does happen. Anyway, other bits to note, it felt reasonably good in the hand and nimble. I do like the way this sword feels. It's comfortable in the hand, it's comfortable in the swing. Not a huge personal fan of wheel pommels, but again, I don't study historic European martial arts. Perhaps that's an important feature to have for you. For me, it's not so much. This isn't a sword that I'm necessarily in love with, but I do like and appreciate the way that it feels in the hand. And I happen to like the hilt, the way it looks. I like these fittings. I think it's kind of a classic and pretty applicable. Well, I think it's handsome. I think it's a handsome sword. Anyway, I don't study though, and that's painfully obvious by seeing me move it around. All right, sword friends, I know that's somewhat sparse information, but it's all the relevant stuff that I really have to share. I do regret not sharpening the sword and then sharing some cutting footage of it, which I'm sure it would be a very competent cutter if I put a keen edge on it. The steel seems to be resilient and good. It seems like it has a good profile to take a keen edge. I just didn't do it, and if I did, it would likely have sung through water bottles, and I could have showed some pool noodle cutting and the like, but I didn't. Anyway, hopefully what I have shared has been helpful for you to decide if it's worth your money or not. To me personally, for $390, it does seem like a competently made and good sword. I like the coloration, the kind of uniqueness of the fittings. They're very simple, but just the pattern that they put on here makes them somewhat unique, and I appreciate that. I like the dimension in the grip and the tactile sensation I feel, which is not something that you get in every sword for the price point. The scabbard could be better, but it comes with a scabbard, and the chape doesn't catch on things. The profile of the sword is also handsome, and I can't hold the edge that it came with against it because it wasn't original. Well, it did loosen a little bit beating it against a rock, and it did take some surface scratches cutting a metal can. The edge didn't diminish any more than it was, and the fittings loosening slightly after beating into a log aren't necessarily a deal breaker. It's a reasonable expectation if you are doing that kind of activity with a sword. So yeah, I think it's a reasonably well-made sword. Further, it's designed by Angus Trim, and I believe made by Kingston Arms or manufactured by them. So he's not manufacturing them, but he gives them some designs, a roadmap to success. And generally speaking, it lacks some of the refinement that you would see in a custom-made piece by Angus Trim, but given that it is less than half the cost, I think it's a competent sword and worthy of consideration. There's a lot to appreciate here, and for the price, yes, I do think it's worth it. Offering some dark sword armory are maybe comparable to this. I think the scabbards are more elaborate and interesting, and the polish level is a little bit more interesting as well. but at the same time, they're a little bit more money in many cases. This as well also feels very competent in the hand, and that's something that, depending on the brand that you're looking at, isn't always a given. So I happen to like it, and again, hopefully the Weapon Dynamics computer will let you know if it will feel good or bad. But to me, it feels like it has some authority in the cut, but more that it's a bit lively. I feel reasonably connected to the point, and like that would be the I'd be using it as a pokey boy rather than a choppy boy. Not that it couldn't do either one. Anyway, my opinions on the subject are known at this point, so I'll stop rambling. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.